Okay, so we are at the top of the hour, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alex Wong, I'm the Director of Marketing here at SmartSimple. I know that typically we have Claudine Ting, our marketing specialist in charge of customer success, host these webinars, but she's actually went on holiday, so I'm trying to fill in as best I can. But I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for today's webinar on Beyond Excel, creating compelling and personalized data metrics. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so if you find yourself taking notes and then if you lose your place, don't worry. The recordings will be made available on YouTube after the webinar. Also, if you have any questions, there is a chat box in the Zoom conferencing tool that we are using. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to type in your question into the chat box, and we'll be sure to try and address them at the end of the presentation. Just a couple of other additional things, a few reminders. We do have a number of SmartSimple events that are coming up. Our next event is actually in New York, our block party, which is hosted by Citi. And then in October, we're actually going to be at our annual conference, Elevate. So we hope that you can join us for that. And then in November, for those of you who are interested in visiting us in Copenhagen, we are actually doing our last block party event of the year in Copenhagen, hosted by the Novo Nordisk Foundation. If you're in the area or attending some of the trade shows or conferences, we are going to be at a number of them. So actually this next month, we're going to be at the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance Conference, as well as the Americans for the Arts Conference, and the Points of Light Conference is going to be a busy month for us. And then in July, we are at the N4A Conference. So if you are attending those events, please feel free to drop by. We will have exhibition booths set up. And then finally, we do have a couple of upcoming webinars in the month of June, SmartSimple Security Tools. As always, you can register at smartsimple.com/events. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our featured presenter. I think most of you know her and have done some training with her, Sharon Courtney. She's our lead trainer. She's been with us for a number of years now, and I couldn't think of anyone better to lead us on these types of training webinars than Sharon herself. So without further ado, Sharon, would you care to take it away?
Thanks, Alex. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. So what we're going to be working on is Beyond Excel. So of course, everyone needs to retrieve some form of data, do some different things with it. So what I wanted to do today was talk about creating some really personalized data metrics. So whether you need to create board reports or keep staff up to date with live data metrics, anything like that, there's a lot of detail and different things to cover at that point. So what we wanted to cover today was how to create personalized dashboards, so for staff and external users, as well as internal ones if you need to. Build ad hoc visualizations, so that means you can provide those visualizations without having to create charts in Excel. And you can also control the security level of each list view, each chart, and so on. So that can hopefully provide some more in-depth dynamic data overviews. But what I wanted to begin with was just a brief summary of some of the things we can do with list views. And I will be walking through some demonstration of these when we get to the actual system. I'll be flipping back and forth between two of our systems. But a few things for list views, some of you may already know this. They're available on every object level. So what I mean by that is they're available on the organization's list view. They're available for your users, your contacts, any kind of tracking application you have running, so grants manager, program manager, any of those on any level. Within each of those, you can create and combine filters, so dynamic ones that you can use for date, time, and so on. You can allow a download files option, which allows you to download all of the attachments to all of the records in your list, and it will download them all in one zip file, notify you when it's ready. We can use what's called smart card indicators, which allow you to collect groups of objects into different cards, and then you can share them with different people. We can allow group email, so that allows you to email a group of applicants, for example, just from a list of maybe approved applications from a previous year. You can also bring in some really neat formatting options. So that means you can color code, you can move things around, basic totals, and any of these list views that you create, with or without filters, you can then convert into multiple view options. So one of them is dashboards. Another is you've got your portal shortcuts, you've got your interactive charts. You can export any of these to Excel. You can also work with batch updates, so if you need to perform multiple actions on multiple records at the same time, you can do that. We've also been doing some really nice upgrades recently to allow your staff the option to create their own view. Not create their own view so much as personalize it and really work with that. So without further ado, we're actually going to just briefly look at the filters that are available, and then we'll take that and walk through a couple of demonstrations. So a quick note on the dynamic filters, what kind of filters are available. We've got system or personal ones, so if a staff member needs to create their own ones, but no one else needs to use it, a personal filter is great. You can drill down by month, even down to as detailed as date, time, and year. That's a recent upgrade. We can search any field, you can search for negative values, and you can combine your search statements. So let's go to one of the instances and have a look at how that can appear. So we've got one of our instances here. We've got a really nice ListView laid out. I'm just toggling between the two here. So what we can do with any of these ListViews, most of the features I've mentioned are on demand. So we can edit any ListView by clicking the drop down, and you can see the wrench icon next to any of these. And just a quick note for anyone on the line, you do need to be a system administrator to edit ListViews. Of course, an external user would not be able to do so. And you can edit any of these by selecting the wrench. Quick note, whenever you see the name default, just if anyone is new to this, it's best practice to leave the default as generic and basic as possible, and to leave it there with no filters assigned. The reason we have that is usually so it's the first one you might see, and you can search within that if you need to. So with that in mind as well, if you have something searched or filtered and then log out, the system is sticky. So whenever you log back in, all of your pre-selected preferences, whatever you had in there, are going to remain until you clear them off. But let's actually go into one of these ListViews here, maybe on the other screen. We'll go into our, for example, corporate giving here. And I'm going to see my list of grants. So I can see now that I've got my different columns here, I've got my layout, and a few things I can do to make this a bit more personalized. So one is I can change around this list view. So again, I've got the default. I have no upper limit on however many I want to create. Of course, I can always drill down and make some of them not available in this list if I need to. But let's go to the wrench and just walk through some basic changes. And before we get started, one thing I would always recommend, and you may notice this on my system here, is that I am on the backup instance. So you should all have a backup instance. It's the same as your standard one. It just has DK appended to the SmartSimple section of your URL. It means that it's a really good sandbox for testing. If you're not sure whether you're comfortable with making those changes online, this is the place to go. So we've changed around some of the options down here. We've got our view name as standard. We can create our filter. So if I had one already created, I could simply select from one of these. The binoculars is nice because I can actually see what goes into the filter and who made it before actually including it. But if I wanted to make changes, I can always edit it. A few things about our new view styles. So we have list, grid, and tree. So all those will provide different views depending on what you need. The tree view is one of my favorites. It's actually a recent upgrade, and it allows you to treat each record as a parent. So you can expand it. You can then see any activities or users attached, files uploaded. So if you opened an organization record in tree view, you would see all the contacts within that organization. So it can be really nice to show people instead of opening up an organization hierarchy, as an example. And when you have the grid selected, you can actually create a card view. So let's say you have applicants who upload an image to all of their applications. You can then display it on the list. So you can choose full, large, or small images. And how that can look here, we've got the full width here. We can have our thumbnail to the left, and we can have our thumbnail to the right. So depending on what works. I would recommend making sure that the amount of images you get uploaded are enough to make this actually look reasonable. Of course, if not a lot of users upload images, you may just have quite a few blanks. So it does depend. But getting back in here, you can also manifest any list view as a tab if it's particularly important. Of course, being aware that that does take up some screen real estate. You can enable some default buttons. So this is really nice if, for example, you have a list where you need to do a lot of batch updates. So you need to select all of them and do multiple actions all the time. And clicking a row means that you open a record. You want to avoid that. So you can give them an open button instead. That way you can run those kind of tasks. That would be the reason that we can provide either an open button or row clickable, just if anyone's curious. And we can also provide a quick edit button. So what a quick edit button will do is allow you to edit any of the values in the columns on the list. Me personally, I prefer the split screen view because usually there's more elements than 5 or 6 that I need to update. So I would usually just go with split screen, but up to you. And down here are some of the feature options. So just to go through a few which are really useful. Open in edit mode is great if you're planning to make changes and you know that no one else is likely to be going into that record. So a good example would be once an application is submitted, an applicant can't make any changes, so opening that record in edit mode for an internal staff member makes a lot of sense. Enable row clickable means you click a record, it opens, straightforward. Enable file download is one of my preferred features that I have on these because usually there's something I need to get out of a full list of records, and rather than open each individually, this is much quicker. If I enable the map panel, what it will do is take each record on that list and it will plug in the client's address. So I can then see how they all scatter out on the map. Pretty cool. And I can also mark this as configuration only, which means I don't have to see it in the list. Okay, so far so good. And I can also define which roles have access to this. So this is as relevant as what roles have access to what in your system. So what I mean by that is setting roles makes a lot of sense if you know that multiple user roles can access where you're creating a list view. If it's a section that's only for system administrators, it wouldn't need to be as much of a concern, but it is good practice. So then here we can change our columns. So as I did mention in the brief summary there, we can go up to 30 columns on a list view. Best practice for something you'll be looking at day in, day out on your screen is about 10 columns. That otherwise you will then open the option for endless scrolling back and forth. The system is responsive, so it can look a little less presentable that way, but it's possible. And you can also have multiple values in each column. So if, for example, I wanted to have the organization address here, I could scroll down until I get my organization address, and I can then click the plus to create it as a new column. I can now see I'm getting my little warning, keep it between 4 and 10 columns. But then within this, I can click the cell, and when I do that, I can edit the header, I can edit the content, so I could put in punctuation, line breaks, anything like that. Unfortunately, no HTML, as it is now more of a security risk. I can change the text alignment and the font color as well as font weight, if I wish. Within this, if I've got this cell selected, I can now see the option to add fields to the current column as well. So for example, I'll include the city, and just to make sure they're on a separate line, I'll click this enter button so that they're here. And let's include state, just to be really fancy. And to really highlight this, I'm going to make it a delightful magenta shade, make it bold, and maybe I might want to drag and drop some of these columns around. So very simple, once you hover over the top, you can pull any of these left or right. And if I don't want to see that particular record field, I can just click the X, remove that column, and then my warning goes away. Excellent. Okay. I can also put a total on a numeric field. So I've got a show total here. Let's also throw in a different color just to really hammer those color changes home. And on this list view, what's really neat is if I wanted to make bring in any fields from the organization level, the grant level, the applicant, or the branch, on this record I can. So that would be your kind of your main submission manager, your requests, anything like that. And what I'd always recommend here, I'm on backup, so I'm just testing around, but if I wanted to see these changes, I can copy it as a system or a personal list view. So just a brief explanation on what the system list view is versus a personal list view. A system list view can be used on portals. It can be used for, dashboard reporting, anything like that, whereas a personal list view is only for you. You can make it public so that other people can review it, but it can't be made into anything further than that. So I'm going to make it a system list view. And when I do that, it brings in all of my settings, just with a copy in parentheses. So I'm actually just going to go with Sharon training. You can see I've done this before. And I'm going to make the display order 1 so it shows up first. So the display order always goes in ascending order, just a heads up there. And that can also, we can put in a sort order if we wish. So if we wanted to make this a bit more granular than simply last modified at the top, which it will default to, I can do that here. Or I can just leave it as is and then just make sure that I can export it to Excel. If I wanted to export it to a specific internal storage folder, I can do that from here. So I can export it to a Smart folder or a configuration folder held in the same place, if anyone's curious. I can run processes like update status after export, trigger a workflow after export. I personally prefer to keep this on more of an event change basis, so when an applicant submits or someone takes an action, rather than with something like an export, because it's a little more difficult to put the instructions around that. Down here, you can also update some of the Excel settings. Candidly, I found that the defaults are absolutely fine. The only thing about an export to Excel is it will not include any original formatting. So those beautiful color combinations I had on my other page will never go through to Excel, unfortunately. Side note to that, if you do export to Excel, you have multiple values in the same column, they will not include that formatting or line breaks as an example. So just something to be mindful of. Quick edit here, I can enable particular fields for quick edit if I wish. And then batch update buttons allow me to create buttons to actually just perform one action, because one concern with batch update is there's a very large fear of clicking the wrong button in error and then running a batch update on a bunch of stuff. So what you can do here is create a batch update button that takes the one action that you want to happen over and over. So usually a good use case for that would be, let's say you have a list of applications that are pending approval, and you want to give them staff members one button which just batch approves everyone at the same time. That way the emails will go out at the same time, everyone gets notified simultaneously, and then your work is done. This is what a batch update button can be used for. So from here you can select your roles, very, very important, and you can select the option that you wish to update. So these are the options available to you here. So a good example might be archived, maybe even updating a status. So here, for example, to approved, that would be a good one. You can, once you save that, you can give them a confirmation message. So down here, yes, something very, very basic. You can give them an icon if you wish, all that good stuff. But for now, let's go back to our list and have a look at how that can appear. So let's go back to our corporate giving. So right now, it's now got some of my changes in there. We've got our color scheme, we've got some changes, but I'm going to actually go back to my one that I've just made, just so that I can see I've got my batch update status. I would need to put a label in there or some kind of icon. I was being a little bit quick there. But the batch update will still be available. If I don't select anything, it presumes everything, just a heads up there. And I can see here I have the option to update all of these different elements or characteristics of each graph. But then, of course, I also have that fear of accidentally clicking delete. It is a fear, and batch update will override any individual restrictions. So if there are blank fields and you batch update it to approved or something like that, it will not validate from the ListView. Just a quick note, if anyone does accidentally delete a record, don't worry, they're not gone. They are kept in a deleted records area in the system for 1 year. So you can always restore any of those. The same goes for custom fields. And from here as well, just a few elements within this. So here we have our group email option. So this is a feature that you would enable in the security features of your system. So for organizations and users, you would enable this via the global settings. For the tracking application level, you would enable that via the security settings in that tracking application. But just to show you what it can do, so this group email option, I can now say, okay, pick, say my applicants, I want to email them and tell them, okay, we have a new application open. I can either type something ad hoc, please reapply, or I can select a template. So we have the option to create individual templates for any of these. So if there was a particular one you wanted to include, that can be there too. And with these, you can also include smart folder attachments and CC yourself if you would like to receive as many emails as you were sending out. So from here, I can just go next. It will show me a preview of what this is, and I can trigger the send. Again, I'm doing this on backup, so of course it won't reach any applicants. But I would say if you're curious to test that out, you can always send it on backup. Make sure to go to your message queue, and any messages triggered on backup there will be a record of it in the in queue tab. So you can always test to see how it would look before doing it on live. Within this as well, once I select specific applications, I can see that my options up here will change. So for example, I now have the delete option. I have the add to smart card option, which is one of my favorites. This is a really good way to delegate work around, especially if you're not sure who's available or who's in the system very frequently. So if I open this up, I've got all my records selected, so I click add to smart card. What this can allow me to do is either add these to an existing one, or I can create a new one to say an emergency. Let's say I had an emergency where I won the lottery and I need to leave immediately, but I'm not sure who is really available to take these on. I can share this card with individual users. So for example, if I select Alex, start typing Alex, or see what names come up, or I can share them with a full role. So everyone who has the program manager role, for example, will get this card. They can take on the work, and then it can cover me while I'm not available. I can also allow other users to edit and share this card if I need to, and just click Add New Card. So smart cards are a feature that you would enable through the security settings in the system. So I find them very, very helpful. You'll always see them under your username. So here, smart cards, they're enabled in the same area as you would enable dashboards. So also really, really helpful to look at. But I did also mention dynamic filters. So far, of course, I haven't really mentioned that. So just a quick note on how we would build these. So we have our basic search bar, of course. We've got the names. I could just start typing, for example, Eric, and I'll see anything with Eric in the name. I have some applicants called Eric in here. I can also drill down by type and status. So if your searches don't ever look quite right, oftentimes it can be something like a sneaky type or status selection that didn't get cleared out. You can also drill down to a specific column that's listed in the list view. But of course, that doesn't cover a lot of the scenarios that I mentioned before. So what we have for that is what we call advanced search. So advanced search is next to the magnifying glass, is this little downward arrow. And what's really neat about this is when I open it, it's going to provide me with the ability to create searching statements. So for example, when I click this to open, I can see that one, I can select any filters that I have previously created or searched, okay? I can still drill down by type and status. I can also then start my search statement. So from here, I can search by what is or by what is not. So if I'm looking for everything except something, or if I'm looking for exceptions, anything like that, that's helpful. I can also search the field of not only the records that I'm in, so in this case the grant, but I can also search from the connected organization, the connected applicant, or even the connected grant staff in this case. Definitely worth clicking that drop down just to see what you can get out of each individual list view. It will change depending on where you are. And then from here we can see all the fields, so it will always list standard fields first, then custom fields next. Good to know. And depending on the field I select, the search options will change. So just to show you for an example, I could search any keyword from here. For example, if I searched any kind of keyword, it would search all of the grants, all of the data within those grants, and pull something back. But for now, I'm going to go with a date search. So I'm going to go with modified date. And now what's really nice about this is my date options change. And some of these, if you select them right, you don't have to update them as much in the future. So as an example, if I pick this year, then I'm always going to return current year. It's not hard-coded to a particular date. If I pick something like on or before, I would need to select the date here, but if I pick something like this month, last month, etc., I can look at that. If I had a date time field, I can also use that. So as an example, if you want to see how many of your applicants submit within an hour of the deadline every time, you can always find that out. So I'm not sure if that would be a useful thing to know, but perhaps. So if I went with modified this year and click search, then I can see what kind of results I will get. So it looks like my screen is just having a little bit of a moment. So pardon me. Okay, great. So I've got modified date is in this year. And one thing I do recommend when you're building these is rather than add all your criteria in one go and then search, you're best off just going in, searching one, then adding more as you go. So my screen's a little bit crunched up, but on the right, you will have the X to clear your search, and on the left, you can add even more criteria. So there's no upper limit on filters you can add to this, by the way. You can make this as granular as you would like. The only limit, of course, is your time and patience. So from here, you can now start to build this out a little bit in a bit more detail. So if you've worked with Excel before, this will be pretty familiar for you. You can say, all right, so I always want to see what's in this year, but maybe what I'm looking for is fields that are blank. So maybe I would say, I might pick an organization field, say, pick my organization, say, well, tell me where the country is blank or empty, and then I can go with a bunch of or statements. So it's just, in this hypothetical, I have a bunch of applications submitted. I want to see how many of them have actually completed their organization profile. So I'm just searching for any blanks within that, and then I can just use that and save it every single time. So if I save that now, I can now provide it with a name. Quick note here, if you used user filter or save that quickly as a default, that means you cannot use this on a list view. So it can be still used as a filter you would select, but I would always recommend going with system filter as an option, and then give it a name, something like staff, this year blank data. That's like a good title. So just, it's good to have a naming convention for your list views, just to say like, okay, this one's for staff, this one's external, this one's for applicants, and a brief summary of what it should look for. So we can see here we've got filter, modified date is in this year, and organization country is empty. We can also store the status and type. So if you don't want to lock down your status and type, that's what you can do with that. And I save that. I could then go back to my initial list view and add that filter to it, and then I would always see that amount of records. So I'm going to actually go with that. Data. So of course, that's a lot of good stuff, but how do we make it turn from that into this? So a series of shortcuts, some visuals. How do we make that look different? So it all starts from list views. And if we go back to our roles and security here and user roles, what we can do with that is we can actually take those list views and convert them into interactive charts or list views. So just to show you a few options that we do have available here, if I went into common here as an example, one thing you can always do yourself if you're not sure about the existing portal but you're nervous about making changes, totally understandable. You can always use draft portal mode, this wrench at the top left. Clicking that will give you a second option here, draft portal. And when you click that to open it, it will actually give you a totally blank portal to work with. So you can always use a sandbox when you go. But for now, let's just look at an existing one. So let's scroll down to where we've got our corporate giving options. So that corporate giving menu item up here corresponds with this one here. So let's open that up. And we can see the way we built this is a white paper theme with sections in the content type. And when we scroll down, we can see that we've got a few sections. One's a chart, one's a shortcut. And the good news is you don't have to do anything particularly special to make these happen. You just need to make sure your type here is selected as a chart. Then when you scroll down, you've got your option to select from any list view. and that will just deliver you the list view you're looking at rendered as a chart. You can have a default view of a chart, table, or list view. You can select your chart type, so pie, bar, donut, all that fun stuff. Label your axes, of course, and then you will get your chart. So what's neat about these is, let's just duplicate this tab for a second, just so we can see the changes. If I was to look at this chart here, it's not static. It's really nice because I can actually click each one and expand it, exclude it. If I actually click into that record, I see all of my data. I can go back by clicking View Chart. I can view all the data in this list here with the batch update available. And as well as that, if you, for example, there was a meeting, sudden emergency meeting, and you need to bring in the real-time results, these are real-time. And on the right, you can print or download any of these charts. So if you just needed to put together a presentation really quickly, this is what you can do. And then depending on the chart type you have, you can often go into more detail. As well as that, all of these up here are shortcuts. So just to show you where we've actually built those, shortcuts can be built on any portal. And from here, they're all still built from ListView. So for example, if I pick employee donations, or let's go with, what did this one say? So this one was our corporate giving. We'll look at our shortcuts here. Let's just find those records. So community grants, okay. So let's find the community grants. And then when we open this up, again, we can see that it's set as an icon. We have an icon in here. And then it's just picking from a URL if you wanted to pick from a random menu, or if you wanted to pick from a particular list view, you can do that too. So grants by type is an example. You can see that that's just pulling from a system list view. You pick the column you would like to aggregate. The more unique, the better. And you can always put in what kind of aggregation you would like. So if you want it to be a count, fantastic. If it's summing a particular requested amount, you can do that too. Set your number format to make it sure it looks correct. So if you pick currency, it will pull in your standard currency, commas for large numbers, abbreviations if necessary. So all of those options are available, and you can link those to a list view. Okay, so far so good. But then, of course, there's always an exception. There might be someone who needs to see certain teams in the system, and they're not quite sure how to change that, or they might be the only one looking for that. So we have a couple of options with that. One is we can inform them that on every one of these list views, you'll now see this little line with dots in it. We've got the list view options here. It looks like kind of sliders or faders. You can actually define which columns you want to be visible or not. And as well as that, you can define whether you want to see the smart cards, to open the records in the modal window. So that just means it opens like this window would, and then you can shut it rather than be toggled from screen to screen, and also how many records you would like to display per page. Save your preferences, and then you're good to go. That means that people aren't as obligated to request new list views. If all they need to do is just exclude a couple, that might just be what they're looking for. So from here, as well, if I wanted to, I could also create dashboards. So a good example might be a CEO. They don't necessarily want to see the full list of records, but they might want a top-down summary. So dashboards are really nice for that. And the good news of this is you don't have to inform them where to get to it. You can actually show them how to set a view as a home page. So that means that it's the first thing somebody sees when they log in. So as an example, but dashboards are something you would enable in the security features. So going in here, we can select a particular one. So I've got my upgrade one here. So what we've got is, at the moment, we've got a pie chart we've created here, which again, if we open it up, we'll see that it just came from a list view yet again. And we've also got the option to create an aggregate of options. So these are not interactive in that if you click them, it won't open the full record of data, but I can still see all of these different aggregates. And what's nice about this is I can now say ignore list view security. So you could provide the number summary to a staff member without giving them the full list view of data. You're not exposing any personal information, but you are giving them the basic metrics. So that ignore list view security can be super helpful in that sense. Of course, there's all kinds of options you can do with dashboards and cards. You can create as many as you need to on each page. I usually say 6 is a good number, but with these you can add list views, different kinds of charts, and those aggregates as well. And then once you're ready to go, you can click this share icon up at the top, and you can share it with either individual users or roles as before. So for example, if you knew that there was a board meeting coming up, you could create a nice fancy dashboard and share it with all the different board members. They could then open it up on their screens while you're presenting to the board, just as an example. So of course, with that, we have a lot available. And then now within each portal, when we're building those up, you can select the list view and then select an individual filter as well. We've kind of separated that out. The other thing you can now do is a mixed record list view. So what that means is you can have a list view. We generally tend to recommend simple on this one, but you can have one that has both applicants, organizations, activities, users, any other records, all in one list. So rather than having a bunch of scattered ones, that can be pretty useful. You can have a sort of master list. Caveat to that is there needs to be a list view for each record type, and you combine them, so they need to have the same columns, the same characteristics. But it is very, very useful. Okay, so list views, of course, are fantastic, but there are some limitations with them. For example, you can't run formulae or calculations, aggregations, anything like that. And 30 columns might not always be enough. So we do have an alternative as well. Sorry, make it visual. We've got reports. So reports can go up to 100 columns. They have calculation and aggregation. You can schedule that export in multiple formats. You can run OData connections if you'd like to just have something in a protected Excel document. You can also now bring in pivoting options, that's as of our last upgrade. And you can internet enable the results, and you can also create charts. So that's pretty neat. You can do all of that through the system. So under menus, you can see now reports. So the reports are a little bit more technical than list views in terms of you may need to know a little bit of SQL if you need to run some particular options or programs. You only get up to 5 criteria for filtering as opposed to limitless on the list view. And these can be a little bit more time consuming because you are manually connecting data sets. But let's just go with a 5K one, just to show you what is possible here, some of the options I mentioned. So for example, we've got one that's been built here. This is applications more than 5,000 in the last month. If I preview this, how it's going to look is with kind of a grouping, total group by, we've got a per region. Just want you to see how much is being given out. We can create a PDF of this from here if we want that exact format. Alternatively, we can allow multiple export types. So a few notes for some of those features. How we can enable internet access from here, from URL is here. And the OData connector here will provide us with different access links, public and private. We will only get private if we haven't selected internet enabled. But if you hover over the versions, it explains which one is for which. So 2 and 4, Salesforce, 2 and 3 for Office, 4 for Office, 2 for Power Pivot, 4 for Power Query. So there's something for everyone in there. Then down here as well, you can enable pivot view. So that is provided that you have reports with exactly 2 columns using group by. So you may need to toggle with some of the results a little bit for now. You can merge sub-reports provided you are in classic click mode, just a quick note there. And you can enable caching. So what's really nice about OData is you can bring those results into a web page, for example, and they will refresh in real time. However, if it's a big report, you may want to cache it a little bit, like maybe by 30 minutes or something like that, just to lower your processing time. On the security level, you can also set up the security here. That being said, if you provided an internet-enabled link, it's a little bit more complex. But in general, sysadmin should be the only one to have access to the full list of reports. File export here, you can set it up in multiple Excel formats, HTML, CSV, PDF. And you can also export to a unique folder within your system. So if you wanted to store it internally, you can set up a custom export. So if you're pushing values from a report into a field, you can do that too. And what's really nice about reports is that you can schedule that export. So for example, if you knew that you just wanted a monthly output of all your data at the end of the month that just went to a folder, and you have that at the end of the year. You could just run a quick scan on all of that. You can do that. So you can do a file or custom export on a particular frequency. So if you need this to happen on a regular basis, you can export it to a specific folder, update its status, trigger a workflow if you need to. A good workflow might be emailing a person to say this report is ready, please review it, but entirely up to you. The template will build automatically, but you can update it if you need to. That being said, there are other ways to do so. And the charts here can be created from the existing report. You would just choose your display settings, if it should be cached, and so on. Same option as before. Your chart types, you have a few different options than the previous, but that is there. And how we actually build that report, for anyone who hasn't used them, it's this 4-square button up here, the report builder. When we open this up, we can actually select fields from our particular data set, drag and drop, set our criteria here. We have the option to input formulae, sort by alignment, grouping options, date, time, and so on. We can also update those column headers if we need to. If anyone's curious about reports, we have a bunch of videos on them, and we also have our help column down here, which should hopefully give some insight. And lastly, I did also want to highlight one other option for getting the most out of your data. So I did mention the map panel briefly, and I do think that that can be pretty nice, but I would say that your best bet for that is going to be duplicate a ListView that works for you, that has the data you need, and simply change one to have a map panel enabled. So that way you can actually see, when I have this laid out, where my organizations actually are. I can scroll out to review them throughout the system as well. And I can bring in some filtering options. So if I need to show particular records, and there are overlays available depending on location. So that's pretty cool. But as well as that, there's the option to use BI dashboards as well. So what that can do is, it's a pre-built dashboard you can build out from anywhere in your system. It gives you these 6 charts that you've got. You then select your grouping amounts, how you want to present these records, anything like that, and then it will give you those. So definitely worth having a look in there if that would be something you might be interested in. It really depends on your needs. But that would be a brief overview to getting the most out of your data. Of course, having a basic idea of what you should expect, what you do need to see, super helpful, but definitely would recommend having a bit of an explorer throughout the system. And one thing I wanted to mention as well, if there was some particular report that you wanted to view on your portal, on your page, anything like that, when you're building portal sections, you can create a link to any report, and that will allow you to either review the data or to review a report chart. So if you have one created, that's also available. But I think I'm good to take questions from here.
Yep.
So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to.
We actually do have one question, and I was kind of curious about this one myself. Where do you go to turn on the dashboards option under the username?
Oh, good question. Thanks. Yeah. So where we do that is, I'm just going to toggle back and to here. And so under menu, go to global settings. And then from here, a couple of options you have. One is if you're feeling super lazy, you can always click security features or even just security. You've got all of these options. I'm just going to go to security. System feature permissions. That was my fault. From here, under security, system feature permissions, we've got at the end the feature permission option over here. So what I would do is just click dashboard and just have a scroll down, try and find what I'm looking for. Enable personal dashboard is what you need. So I would definitely recommend enabling that for sysadmins at the start. And then you can also expand that as it works. This is where you would also enable smart cards and a bunch of other goodies. In fact, what I would recommend for everyone on this call is every 3 months or so, check into the system feature permissions, because that's usually where the goodies are, in my experience. Hopefully that helped.
Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions? I think that's the only question. So,
oh, actually, I do see one from Joan.
Oh, okay.
How do you delete ListViews you don't need? So good question. One thing I would say before deleting a ListView you don't need is just be sure that it isn't in use on any kind of portal record. So what I would do first, before doing so, you can just go to your portals, make sure that none of these are in place. I'm going to just go into the Sharon training one, in fact. And I'm going to scroll down. The delete option is here for sysadmins, but just bear in mind that if you do delete a ListView, unfortunately it cannot be restored. It would need to be rebuilt. So just to be mindful of deleting it prior, just to make sure that it's not actually present anywhere, because of course that can change how the user might see the system.
And I think we had one other question here, Sharon.
Can you pull histories from a ListView? So just example, how long it took an applicant to complete an application. That's a good question. So in general, I've found that it's not something I would pull directly from a ListView. I have looked at the individual status of a record and how long it's taken to go through each of those, but I wouldn't, as far as I'm aware, let's just do a quick check and see if we can do this. So we went to our advanced search. We currently don't have anything for status aside from the actual options within it. On an individual level, you can monitor the history of the status, but you can use that through a report. So I have done that, built a status duration log. In some cases, it may require a little bit more work in that you may stamp a date every time an application moves from status to status, so you have a very clear log in that sense, but it depends. The reason we would have that is because if a record goes back and forth between statuses, but again, super context dependent. Incidentally, if you wanted to view the history of any status, you can enable track changes on a status, quick history, and that will show you the actual record of time for there, as we can see here. So I hope that answered that question.
Great. Okay. I don't see any other questions come in. So if you do have questions that you can think of after we conclude this webinar, you can always reach out to our support team. They'd be glad to assist you with any questions or concerns that you might have. Otherwise, as mentioned, just one more quick reminder of some of the events that we are hosting. We've got the block parties in New York and San Diego, which of course leads into Elevate. And then we're wrapping up the year of SmartSimple events with our block party in Copenhagen. So hopefully you can join us for some, if not all of those events. And then of course, upcoming trade shows and events that we're attending will be in Indiana and Minnesota through the months of June, and then in New Orleans in the month of July. So if you're attending some of those events, we'd love to see you there. And then just one more reminder for our June webinars. We're actually doing them on the 18th and the 20th. As always, you just need to go to smartsimple.com/events to register for those events. And next month's topic is SmartSimple Security Tools Do-It-Yourself. But as I mentioned, this webinar was recorded, so once I get the recording back in process, I will upload it onto YouTube, and that will be available for all of you to view it at your leisure. So thank you very much for everyone's time, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.